The incident at the car dealership. The streets of Los Angeles were unusually quiet that evening, the golden hues of the setting sun casting long shadows across the pavement. Keanu Reeves had just wrapped up a long day of meetings, scripts, and conversations about his next big project. Known for his humility and low-profile lifestyle, Keanu often opted to do things on his own, away from the glitz and glamour of Hollywood. Tonight was no different. He had recently sold his old motorcycle, one of his most prized possessions, to help fund a community project that provided support to underprivileged artists. Now, he needed a simple, reliable car, not for show, not for speed, but simply to get him from point A to point B. As someone who valued practicality over luxury, he chose a small dealership tucked away on the outskirts of the city. It was one he had spotted while driving by on another occasion. Dressed in a worn gray hoodie, loose-fitting jeans, and scuffed sneakers, Keanu parked his rental car a block away and walked to the dealership. A baseball cap pulled low over his face completed his unassuming look. He wanted no fanfare, no special treatment, just an ordinary experience like any other customer. As he pushed open the glass door, a chime announced his arrival. Inside, rows of gleaming cars sparkled under fluorescent lights. Salespeople in sharp suits lingered by the reception desk, chatting and sipping coffee from paper cups. Their laughter echoed through the space, but it abruptly stopped when they noticed him. Keanu's entrance didn't exactly scream celebrity. To the staff, he looked like someone who had wandered in by mistake. His clothes were simple, his demeanor unassuming. He approached the nearest desk with a warm smile, but no one immediately greeted him. A moment of awkward silence passed before a young salesman reluctantly walked over. Can I help you?" the salesman asked, his eyes flicking up and down, clearly judging Keanu's appearance. "Yes, I'm looking for a car," Keanu replied, his tone polite and calm. "Something reliable, nothing too flashy." The salesman raised an eyebrow, as if to say, "Are you serious?" "Well," he hesitated, glancing back at his colleagues, who were now smirking behind their desks. "We might have something in our used section." Keanu nodded, unfazed. "That's fine. Can you show me what you've got?" The salesman sighed, clearly uninterested in helping. "I guess I can spare a few minutes. Follow me." As Keanu trailed behind him, he couldn't help but notice the sideways glances and barely concealed whispers from the other staff. He ignored them. Over the years, he had grown accustomed to being underestimated when he wasn't on the big screen or dressed for an event. The salesman led him to the back lot, where a handful of older cars were parked. Most had seen better days. Keanu inspected a few, opening doors and checking interiors. He asked thoughtful questions about mileage, maintenance, and reliability, but the salesman's answers were curt, almost dismissive. Finally, Keanu pointed to a modest sedan that seemed to be in decent shape. "What about this one? How much are you asking for it?" The salesman snorted. "That's not really in your price range, is it?" Keanu tilted his head, confused. "I didn't mention my price range." The salesman chuckled, crossing his arms. "Look, I don't mean to be rude, but these cars aren't cheap. If you're not serious about buying, maybe you shouldn't waste my time." Before Keanu could respond, a voice cut through the air. "What's going on here?" It was the dealership manager, a tall, broad-shouldered man in a tailored suit. His presence immediately commanded attention. He glanced at the salesman, then at Keanu. His expression shifted from neutral to disdainful in a matter of seconds. "This guy's looking for a car," the salesman said, barely concealing his amusement. "But, I don't think he's exactly our target customer." The manager looked Keanu up and down, his eyes lingering on the frayed hem of his hoodie and the worn soles of his sneakers. "Is that so?" he said, his tone dripping with condescension. "Listen, buddy, we run a business here. If you're not serious about making a purchase, I suggest you take your window shopping elsewhere." Keanu's face remained calm, though his chest tightened at the words. He had dealt with judgment before, but it never got easier. Still, he chose to rise above it. "I understand," he said simply. "Thank you for your time." He turned and began walking back toward the entrance. Behind him, he could hear the salesman and manager muttering and laughing. "Can you believe that guy?" the salesman said. "What a waste of time." The manager chuckled. "Yeah, well, he clearly walked into the wrong place. Probably doesn't even have $1 to his name." Outside, the cool evening air greeted Keanu as he stepped onto the sidewalk. He took a deep breath, letting the moment sink in. He could have revealed who he was. He could have bought the entire dealership on the spot if he wanted to. But that wasn't his style. As he walked away, his thoughts began to shift. What had started as a simple trip to buy a car was now something much bigger. This wasn't about him anymore, it was about the larger message. How many others had been treated the same way? How many people had been dismissed, judged, or humiliated because of how they looked or where they came from? Keanu decided then and there that he wasn't going to let this experience end with bitterness. Instead, he would turn it into something meaningful, something that would inspire change, not just for himself but for everyone who had ever been made to feel small. A helping hand. The night air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of blooming jasmine from nearby gardens as Keanu walked along the quiet street. His mind replayed the events at the car dealership, but not with anger or frustration. Instead, he felt a deep sense of curiosity. What led people to treat others that way? Was it arrogance, assumption, or something deeper, like insecurity or fear? Lost in thought, Keanu almost didn't notice the voice calling out to him. "Excuse me, sir. Wait a second." He turned to see a woman jogging toward him. She was in her late 40s, dressed casually in a floral blouse and jeans, with a worn leather bag slung over her shoulder. Her kind eyes and warm smile were a stark contrast to the cold demeanor he had just encountered at the dealership. "I'm sorry to bother you," she said, slightly out of breath, "but I saw what happened back there." At the dealership. Keanu raised an eyebrow, surprised. "You did?" She nodded. "I was sitting in the waiting area. I couldn't help but overhear. The way they treated you, it wasn't right." Keanu smiled, appreciating her concern but not wanting to dwell on it. "It's okay. Things like that happen. I'm used to it." "Used to it," she repeated, her tone tinged with disbelief. "That doesn't make it okay." There was a pause as they stood under the soft glow of a nearby street lamp. The woman adjusted the strap of her bag and extended her hand. "I'm Claire, by the way." Keanu hesitated for a moment before shaking her hand. "Nice to meet you, Claire." "I'm Kevin." It wasn't a complete lie. Kevin was a nickname he used occasionally when he wanted to go unnoticed. He wasn't ready to reveal his identity just yet. "Well, Kevin," Claire said, her smile returning, "I just wanted to say I'm sorry you had to deal with that. People can be so quick to judge. They don't take the time to see the person standing in front of them." Keanu nodded, her words resonating with him. "It's true. But I don't hold it against them. Everyone's fighting their own battles, I guess." Claire tilted her head, studying him. "You're a lot more forgiving than most people would be. If it were me, I'd probably be shouting at the manager by now." Keanu chuckled, the tension from earlier starting to fade. "Trust me, I thought about it. But what would that accomplish? Anger just breeds more anger." Claire's expression softened. "You're right. Still, it's rare to meet someone who thinks that way. Most people would have stormed out of there fuming." There was a moment of silence as they stood together, the distant hum of traffic filling the air. Finally, Claire spoke again. "Do you have a way to get home?" she asked. "I noticed you didn't buy a car." Keanu smiled at her kindness. "I've got a rental parked nearby. But thank you for asking." Good, she said, nodding. I just wanted to make sure. You seem like a good person, Kevin. The world could use more people like you. Her words lingered in his mind as she waved goodbye and walked away. Keanu watched her disappear down the street, feeling a strange sense of gratitude. It wasn't often that strangers went out of their way to show kindness, especially in a city like Los Angeles. As he continued toward his rental car, an idea began to form in his mind. Claire's simple act of compassion had reminded him of something important. Kindness didn't have to be grand or flashy. It could be as small as a kind word or a helping hand. And yet, its impact could be profound. Later that night, back at his modest apartment, Keanu sat at his kitchen table, sipping a cup of herbal tea. The events of the day played in his mind like a movie reel. The sneers of the dealership staff. The warmth of Claire's smile. The way her words had sparked something inside him. He opened his laptop and began researching local charities and community organizations. He wanted to do something meaningful, something that would not only address what had happened to him but also help others who faced similar struggles. As he clicked through websites and articles, an idea began to take shape. The idea takes root. Keanu decided he would purchase a few vehicles, not for himself, but for people who truly needed them. Families struggling to make ends meet. Single parents trying to juggle jobs and childcare. Veterans looking for a fresh start. He wanted to give them the gift of mobility, the freedom to pursue opportunities and improve their lives. But he didn't want to make it about himself. He didn't want his name or face attached to the gesture. It wasn't about fame or recognition, it was about creating a ripple effect of kindness. He spent hours making calls and sending emails, reaching out to non-profit organizations that could help him identify families in need. His plan was simple but powerful: surprise them with fully paid vehicles, no strings attached. The next morning, as the first rays of sunlight streamed through the window, Keanu felt a renewed sense of purpose. He got dressed, grabbed his phone, and headed out to meet with a representative from one of the organizations he had contacted. The woman, a cheerful volunteer named Maria, greeted him with enthusiasm. "Mr. Reeves, Kevin," she said with a wink, "thank you so much for reaching out. We've already identified a few families who could really use your help." Keanu smiled, grateful for her discretion. "Thank you, Maria. Let's make this happen." They spent the rest of the day visiting car lots, carefully selecting vehicles that were practical, reliable, and within budget. Keanu paid for each one up front, insisting on anonymity. Maria promised to handle the logistics of delivering the cars to the families, ensuring that Keanu's involvement remained a secret. A chance encounter. As Keanu was leaving the last car lot, he spotted a familiar figure across the street. It was Claire, the woman who had approached him the night before. She was standing by a bus stop, holding a grocery bag in one hand and a coffee cup in the other. Without thinking, Keanu crossed the street and called out to her. "Claire." She turned, surprised. "Kevin. What are you doing here?" "Just running some errands," he said with a smile. "How about you?" "Oh, she replied, gesturing to the bag. "The usual, groceries, coffee, trying to survive another day." Keanu hesitated for a moment before speaking. "Claire, can I ask you something?" "Sure," she said, her brow furrowing in curiosity. "If you had the chance to make a difference in someone's life, something small but meaningful, what would you do?" Claire thought for a moment, her gaze thoughtful. "I guess I'd try to show them they're not alone. Sometimes, just knowing someone cares can make all the difference." Her words struck a chord with Keanu, reaffirming his mission. "Thank you," he said sincerely. "You've given me a lot to think about." As they parted ways, Keanu couldn't help but smile. Claire's simple wisdom had solidified his resolve. This wasn't just about cars or charity, it was about showing people that kindness, no matter how small, could change lives. Keanu's unexpected response. The next morning, the world felt different. The usual buzz of Los Angeles seemed distant to Keanu as he sat in the quiet of his apartment, a steaming mug of coffee in hand. His mind replayed the encounters of the past few days, the ridicule at the car dealership, Claire's words of kindness, and the ripple of inspiration that had begun to take root in his heart. But now, it wasn't enough to simply imagine acts of kindness. It was time to act. The plan. Keanu's idea had grown overnight. Originally, he had planned to anonymously purchase cars for families in need, but he realized this wasn't just about transportation. It was about hope. About showing people that the world could be kind, even when it felt otherwise. Sitting at his laptop, he reached out to several community organizations, including shelters, youth programs, and nonprofits dedicated to supporting veterans. His message was simple yet heartfelt. I'd like to help families or individuals in need. Please connect me with those who could benefit from a small gesture of kindness, especially those who have shown resilience in the face of adversity. The responses came faster than he anticipated. Within hours, his inbox was filled with stories, heartbreaking, inspiring, and deeply human. A single mother working 2 jobs to support her children. A young man who had lost his legs in an accident but dreamed of starting his own business. A family of refugees trying to rebuild their lives from scratch. Keanu read every story carefully, his heart breaking and swelling in equal measure. After consulting with the organizations, he selected 5 families to start with. Each had a unique story, but they all shared one thing in common: they had faced incredible challenges and persevered with grace and determination. The first gift. The following week, Keanu visited the first family on his list, the Garcias. Maria, the volunteer who had helped coordinate the logistics, accompanied him. The Garcias were a family of 5, a father who worked as a janitor, a mother who cared for their 3 young children, and a grandmother who helped raise the kids. Their old car had broken down months ago, leaving the father to take 3 buses every day to get to work. Keanu parked the sleek, gently used minivan a block away from the family's modest home. As Maria knocked on the door, Keanu stood back, his baseball cap pulled low and sunglasses shielding his face. He didn't want recognition, he wanted the focus to be on the family. When the door opened, Mrs. Garcia greeted them with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. "Can I help you?" she asked. Maria smiled warmly. "Hi, Mrs. Garcia. I'm from the local community center. We've been working with your family, and someone wanted to send you a gift." "A gift?" Mrs. Garcia repeated, confused. "I don't understand." Maria gestured toward Keanu, who stepped forward and handed her an envelope. Inside was a set of car keys and a note that read, "To the Garcia family, may this help you build an even brighter future. You inspire us all." Tears welled up in Mrs. Garcia's eyes as she looked from the keys to the stranger standing before her. I don't know what to say." Keanu gestured toward the van parked down the street. "It's for you," he said simply. Mrs. Garcia's hand flew to her mouth as she gasped. "You mean, that's ours?" "How? Why?" "Because you deserve it," Keanu replied softly. "You've worked so hard for your family. This is just a small way to say thank you for all that you do." By now, the entire family had gathered at the door. The children ran toward the van, their laughter filling the air as they explored their new ride. Mr. Garcia, who had returned home just in time, approached Keanu with tears in his eyes. "You didn't have to do this," he said, his voice trembling. We're nobody." Keanu placed a hand on his shoulder. "You're everything to your family. And that makes you somebody. You inspire me, and I hope this van helps make things a little easier for you." The ripple effect. The Garcia family's story quickly spread through the neighborhood. Keanu's efforts were anonymous, but the impact was undeniable. Inspired by his actions, local businesses and residents began stepping up to help others in need. A mechanic offered free repairs for struggling families. A grocery store donated food to the community center. Even the bus driver who had ferried Mr. Garcia to work every day showed up with a small gift for the family. Keanu watched it all from the sidelines, his heart swelling with pride. He hadn't expected his gesture to spark such a movement, but he was grateful that it had. For him, this was proof that kindness was contagious. The dealership revisited. One morning, while browsing through the news, Keanu came across an article about the dealership where he had been humiliated. The headline read, "Local dealership accused of discrimination, former customers speak out." Curious, Keanu clicked on the article. It detailed several accounts from people who had been mistreated or judged unfairly by the staff. Some shared stories eerily similar to his own, describing how they had been dismissed because of their appearance or perceived financial status. Keanu leaned back in his chair, deep in thought. He hadn't planned to return to the dealership, but now he wondered if there was an opportunity to turn the situation around, not out of spite, but to inspire change. A different approach. Later that week, Keanu walked back into the dealership, dressed in the same hoodie and jeans he had worn during his first visit. The same manager and salesman were behind the desk, their faces betraying a flicker of recognition. "You again," the manager said, his tone dripping with disdain. "Didn't we tell you?" Before he could finish, Keanu pulled out his phone and showed them a video of the Garcia family receiving their new van. The laughter of the children echoed through the dealership's pristine showroom, filling the air with a warmth that seemed out of place. "What's this?" the manager asked, confused. "This," Keanu said calmly, "is what kindness looks like. I've purchased 5 vehicles from other dealerships to give to families who need them. Families you turned away." The manager's face paled, and the salesman shifted uncomfortably. We didn't know," he stammered. "That's the point," Keanu replied. "You didn't bother to look beyond appearances. But it's not too late to change." He placed a folder on the desk. Inside were details about the families he had helped and the organizations he had partnered with. "If you want to make amends, start here. These are real people with real needs. You have the power to make a difference." Without waiting for a response, Keanu turned and walked out, leaving the manager and salesman to wrestle with their guilt, and the opportunity he had handed them. The community's reaction. In the weeks that followed Keanu's quiet mission of kindness, the lives of the families he helped began to change in ways they never imagined. The Garcia family was no longer struggling to make ends meet without transportation. Mr. Garcia could now reach his workplace in half the time, leaving him with more hours to spend with his children. The family's gratitude overflowed as they shared their story with neighbors and friends. But this wasn't just about the Garcias. The ripple effects of Keanu's kindness began to spread, touching lives in the most unexpected ways. A spark of inspiration. It started with a mechanic named Luis, who owned a small auto repair shop down the street from the Garcia family. When Luis heard about the new van, he offered to service it free of charge. "This community has given me so much," he said. "If someone's stepping up to help families like the Garcias, the least I can do is keep their vehicle running." Luis's gesture didn't go unnoticed. Soon, other small businesses in the area began stepping up as well. A local bakery started donating fresh bread to families in need. The owner of a corner store set up a donation box, encouraging customers to contribute toward groceries for struggling families. Teachers from the local elementary school organized a fundraiser to provide school supplies for underprivileged children. Keanu watched these developments quietly from the sidelines. He didn't want credit or recognition, he simply wanted to see kindness flourish. It was enough for him to know that his actions had inspired others to look beyond themselves and extend a helping hand. The local news story. One evening, Keanu received a call from Maria, the volunteer who had helped coordinate the vehicle donations. Her voice was filled with excitement. Keanu, you won't believe this, she said. The local news wants to do a story about the families you've helped. Keanu hesitated. He had gone to great lengths to remain anonymous, not wanting the focus to shift away from the families and the community. Maria, I appreciate it, but I don't think it's a good idea. Wait, hear me out, Maria interjected. They don't know it's you. I didn't tell them anything. They just want to highlight the impact of these donations and how it's brought the community together. It could inspire even more people to help. Keanu thought about it for a moment. Maria was right. The story wasn't about him, it was about the power of kindness. Okay, he said finally. But please, keep my name out of it. A few days later, the news crew arrived in the neighborhood. They interviewed the Garcia family, along with the other recipients of Keanu's generosity. The families shared their stories with raw emotion, describing how the vehicles had changed their lives. It's not just a car, Mrs. Garcia told the reporter, her voice trembling. It's freedom. It's hope. It's knowing that someone out there cares about us, even when we feel invisible. The segment aired that evening, and the response was overwhelming. Viewers flooded the station with calls and messages, asking how they could help. Donations poured in for the local community center, and more families began coming forward with stories of resilience and hardship. The dealership's turning point. Meanwhile, back at the car dealership, the manager and staff were still reeling from Keanu's unexpected visit. His words had left an indelible mark on them, forcing them to confront their behavior and the culture they had created. The manager, a man named Victor, couldn't shake the memory of the video Keanu had shown him, the joy on the faces of the Garcia children, the gratitude in Mr. Garcia's voice. For the first time in years, Victor began to question the way he ran his business. Was it really just about profits and appearances? Or could it be something more? One morning, Victor gathered his staff for a meeting. The atmosphere was tense, everyone was aware of the negative attention the dealership had received since the news story aired. We need to talk, Victor began, his voice uncharacteristically soft. I know we've made mistakes. I know I've made mistakes. But it's not too late to change. The staff exchanged uncertain glances. Victor continued, his tone growing more resolute. I've decided we're going to start a new initiative. For every car we sell, we're going to donate a portion of the proceeds to the local community center. And we're going to offer free car repairs for families in need. The room was silent for a moment before one of the salespeople spoke up. But, sir, won't that hurt our bottom line? Victor sighed. Maybe. But I'd rather lose a little money than lose my humanity. This isn't just about selling cars anymore. It's about making a difference. The staff slowly began to nod, and for the first time in years, the dealership felt like a place with purpose. A community united. The dealership's new initiative quickly gained traction. Word spread through the neighborhood, and customers began flocking to the lot, not just to buy cars, but to support a business that was making a difference. The dealership partnered with local charities to identify families who needed help, and Victor personally oversaw the repairs and donations. Keanu watched from afar, his heart swelling with pride. He had never intended for the dealership to become part of the story, but their transformation was a testament to the power of second chances. Claire's contribution. One afternoon, Keanu bumped into Claire again. She was volunteering at the community center, helping to organize a food drive. When she saw him, her face lit up. Kevin. It's good to see you again. You too, Claire, Keanu said, smiling. What brings you here? I heard about everything that's been happening, the donations, the dealership's new program. It's incredible, she said. I wanted to do my part, so I started volunteering here. Keanu felt a surge of gratitude. Claire's kindness had been the spark that set everything in motion, even if she didn't realize it. That's amazing, he said. You're making a real difference. Claire shrugged, a modest smile on her lips. It's nothing compared to what you've done. Keanu opened his mouth to respond but stopped himself. Claire didn't know the full extent of his involvement, and he preferred to keep it that way. Instead, he said, every act of kindness matters, no matter how small. You're part of something bigger now. The ripple becomes a wave. By the end of the month, the community was buzzing with energy and hope. Families who had once struggled to get by now had access to resources and support. Neighbors who had never spoken before were coming together to help one another. And through it all, Keanu remained in the background, quietly observing the impact of his actions. One evening, as he walked through the neighborhood, he spotted a young boy drawing on the sidewalk with chalk. The boy looked up and smiled. "Are you the man who gave my dad a car?" Keanu crouched down to the boy's level, his heart swelling. "No," he said gently. "I'm just someone who believes in kindness." The boy nodded, as if he understood. "My dad says we should always help people when we can." Keanu smiled. "Your dad is a smart man." As he walked away, the boy's words echoed in his mind. Always help people when you can. It was a simple truth, but one that had the power to change the world. Confronting the dealership. A turning tide. The media storm surrounding the car dealership was unlike anything Victor, the manager, had ever experienced. The local news coverage about their past mistreatment of customers, coupled with Keanu's anonymous generosity, had drawn mixed reactions from the community. While some condemned the dealership for its behavior, others were cautiously optimistic about its new initiative to donate a portion of sales to help struggling families. Victor had made mistakes, and he knew it. The sting of Keanu's visit still lingered in his mind. The man in the hoodie, whom he had dismissed so easily, had turned out to be a silent force of change, inspiring an entire neighborhood to rethink kindness and community. But Victor wasn't just facing criticism, he was facing himself. For the first time in years, he looked in the mirror and saw not a successful businessman, but a man who had lost touch with humanity in pursuit of profit. That realization had set him on a journey to transform not just the dealership, but also himself. A public apology. Victor decided it was time to face the music. He called a press conference at the dealership, inviting local reporters, community leaders, and even some of the families who had been impacted by the business's previous behavior. The lot was filled with cameras and curious onlookers as Victor stepped onto a makeshift stage, gripping the edges of the podium with trembling hands. "Good afternoon," he began, his voice unsteady. "Thank you all for being here today. I won't take up too much of your time, but I need to say something I should have said a long time ago." The crowd quieted, leaning in as Victor continued. "Over the years, this dealership has fallen short, not just in customer service, but in basic human decency. We've judged people unfairly. We've made assumptions based on appearances. And in doing so, we've hurt those who deserved better. For that, I take full responsibility, and I want to sincerely apologize." There was a murmur in the crowd, a mix of surprise and curiosity. Victor took a deep breath and pressed on. "I can't change the past, but I can change how we move forward. That's why this dealership is committed to making things right. We've started a program to donate a portion of our profits to help families in need. We're also offering free car repairs to those who can't afford them. But beyond that, we're changing how we treat people. Every single person who walks through our doors will be treated with the respect and dignity they deserve." He paused, looking out at the sea of faces. "I don't expect forgiveness overnight, but I hope we can earn back your trust through our actions. Thank you." The crowd erupted into applause, some skeptical but others moved by Victor's honesty. Reporters swarmed him with questions, but Victor remained focused. He had said his piece. Now it was time to let his actions speak louder than his words. The community's response. The apology sparked conversations throughout the neighborhood. Some residents were cynical, dismissing Victor's speech as a PR stunt. Others, however, were willing to give the dealership a second chance. One of the first people to step forward was Luis, the local mechanic. He approached Victor the day after the press conference with a proposition. "I heard what you said," Luis began, wiping his hands on a grease-stained rag. "I've got a small shop, and I don't have much, but I want to help. If you're serious about this new program, I'll pitch in. I can offer free repairs for a few families a month, and maybe we can work together to do some good." Victor was taken aback by the gesture. "You'd do that? Even after everything?" Luis shrugged. "Everyone deserves a second chance. Besides, it's not about you or me, it's about helping people." The partnership between Luis's shop and the dealership quickly became a symbol of the community's resilience. Together, they began hosting monthly events where families could bring in their vehicles for free repairs and tune-ups. Word spread, and soon other small businesses joined in, donating time, resources, and money to support the initiative. The ripple effect. Keanu watched from a distance as the dealership's transformation unfolded. Though he had no intention of stepping into the spotlight, he couldn't help but feel a sense of pride in how the community had rallied together. One evening, Maria called him with an update. "You won't believe this," she said. "The dealership is hosting a community day next weekend. They're giving away bicycles to kids who don't have transportation, and they're offering free driving lessons for teens who can't afford them. It's amazing." Keanu smiled. "That's incredible. It sounds like they're really turning things around." "They are," Maria agreed. "And a lot of it is because of you, even if no one knows it." "You started this." "No," Keanu replied. "The community started this. I just gave it a little nudge." The media's growing interest. The dealership story began to gain traction beyond the local news. National outlets picked up the story, framing it as a tale of redemption and the power of community. Reporters flocked to the neighborhood, eager to interview Victor, Luis, and the families who had benefited from the new programs. During one of these interviews, a journalist asked Victor, "What inspired you to make these changes?" Victor paused, choosing his words carefully. "It was a combination of things. The kindness of strangers, the resilience of the families we've helped, and someone who challenged me to do better. I don't know his name, but if he's out there, I hope he knows he changed my life." The interview aired that evening, and while Victor's words struck a chord with viewers, they also sparked curiosity. Who was the mysterious man who had inspired such a transformation? A surprise visitor. One afternoon, as Victor was closing up the dealership, a familiar figure walked through the doors. Dressed in his usual hoodie and jeans, Keanu stood quietly, a small smile on his face. Victor froze. "It's you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Keanu nodded. "I just wanted to see how things were going." Victor's eyes filled with tears as he extended his hand. "I don't know how to thank you. You've changed everything, for me, for the staff, for the community." Keanu shook his head. "You did that yourself. I just gave you the opportunity." Victor smiled, his grip firm. "Well, I hope I've made you proud." "You have," Keanu replied. "And I hope you keep going. This is just the beginning." As Keanu walked out of the dealership, he felt a sense of peace. The community had taken his small act of kindness and turned it into something far greater than he could have imagined. And that, he realized, was the true power of humanity. The power of forgiveness. The wounds of the past. As the dealership continued its transformation, the neighborhood buzzed with stories of change and second chances. But for Keanu, there was one lingering question he hadn't yet answered: could he forgive the people who had humiliated him that day? The question wasn't about pride or revenge, it was about closure. Keanu had spent years practicing compassion and mindfulness, yet even he struggled with moments of doubt. He understood that forgiveness wasn't just about absolving others, it was also about freeing oneself from the weight of resentment. Sitting alone in his apartment one evening, Keanu reflected on the incident at the dealership. He thought about Victor, the manager, and how much he had changed. He thought about Jared, the young salesman who had mocked him, and wondered what had driven him to act that way. Was it insecurity? Pressure to meet sales targets? Or simply a lack of empathy? Keanu knew the answers didn't matter as much as the choice he had to make. Forgiveness wasn't about condoning their actions. It was about choosing peace over bitterness. A quiet visit. The next morning, Keanu decided to visit the dealership again. This time, he wasn't there to inspire or challenge anyone. He was there for himself. He walked through the glass doors just as he had weeks ago, his hoodie and jeans blending into the bustle of the showroom. Victor spotted him immediately and hurried over, his face lighting up with a mix of surprise and gratitude. "Keanu," Victor said, his voice warm. "I wasn't expecting you. What brings you here?" Keanu smiled. "Just wanted to see how things are going." Victor gestured toward the showroom, where a group of customers was browsing vehicles. "Better than ever. The new programs have brought in so many people, not just customers, but volunteers, donors, even local businesses. It's like the whole neighborhood has come alive." "That's good to hear," Keanu said. "But there's something else I came to talk about." Victor's expression grew serious. "Of course. What is it?" Keanu glanced around the showroom. "Is Jared still working here?" Victor hesitated, then nodded. "He is. Would you like me to get him?" Keanu nodded. "Please." A conversation of change. Jared approached cautiously, his usual confidence replaced by uncertainty. He had recognized Keanu the moment he walked in and had been dreading this moment ever since. The young salesman had spent weeks replaying their first encounter, haunted by the realization of how poorly he had treated someone who had done nothing to deserve it. "Hi," Jared said, his voice barely above a whisper. Keanu smiled gently. "Hi, Jared. How have you been?" Jared blinked, caught off guard by the kindness in Keanu's tone. I've been okay. Look, I need to say something. I'm sorry for how I treated you that day. It was wrong, and there's no excuse for it." Keanu nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Thank you for saying that. I appreciate it." Jared hesitated, then added, "I've been trying to do better. Victor's new programs have been a big part of that. Helping people, seeing the impact we can have, it's changed the way I think about this job, and about people in general." "I'm glad to hear that," Keanu said. "Change isn't easy, but it's always worth it." Jared looked down, his voice heavy with guilt. Do you think I deserve a second chance?" Keanu placed a hand on Jared's shoulder, his gaze steady. "Everyone deserves a second chance, Jared. What matters is what you do with it." Jared nodded, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "Thank you. I won't waste it. A community forgives." Word of Keanu's visit spread quickly, sparking a new wave of reflection within the community. People began sharing their own stories of forgiveness, neighbors mending old feuds, families reconciling after years of estrangement, and even former enemies finding common ground. At the community center, Maria organized a Day of Forgiveness, inviting residents to come together and share their experiences. The event featured speeches, music, and an open mic session where anyone could step up and tell their story. One by one, people shared tales of hurt, healing, and redemption. A woman spoke about forgiving the friend who had betrayed her trust. A teenager described reconciling with the father who had abandoned him. And Luis, the mechanic, shared his journey of letting go of the anger he had carried toward a rival shop owner who had once undercut his business. Keanu attended the event quietly, sitting in the back of the room. He didn't want to speak, he simply wanted to listen. But as the evening wore on, Maria spotted him and handed him the microphone. "Keanu," she said with a smile, you've been the spark behind so much of this. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Keanu stood, his heart pounding as he faced the room. I'm not sure I have much to say, he began, his voice humble. But I will say this, forgiveness isn't about letting someone off the hook. It's about freeing yourself from the weight of resentment. It's about choosing peace over pain, love over anger. He paused, glancing around the room. We all make mistakes. We all fall short sometimes. But what matters is that we try to do better, that we learn and grow. And when we see someone else trying to change, we owe it to them, and to ourselves, to give them the chance to succeed. The room erupted into applause, and Keanu felt a sense of closure he hadn't realized he needed. He had forgiven Victor, Jared, and everyone else at the dealership, not because they had earned it, but because holding on to anger no longer served him. A ripple of healing. The Day of Forgiveness became an annual event, drawing people from all over the city. What had started as a single act of kindness had grown into a movement of healing and transformation. The dealership became a hub of community support, offering workshops, mentorship programs, and scholarships for underprivileged youth. Keanu continued to work behind the scenes, using his resources and connections to support the initiatives quietly. He didn't want recognition, he wanted impact. Reflections. One evening, as Keanu sat on a park bench watching the sun set over the city, Claire joined him, carrying 2 cups of coffee. She handed him one and sat beside him, her gaze thoughtful. You've done something incredible here, she said. Keanu shrugged. It wasn't just me. It was everyone. Claire smiled. Maybe. But you were the spark. You showed people what was possible. Keanu took a sip of his coffee, the warmth spreading through him. You know, I've always believed that kindness is contagious. But seeing it in action, it's something else entirely. Claire nodded, her expression serene. You've created something beautiful, Keanu. And it's just the beginning. As the sky turned shades of orange and pink, Keanu felt a deep sense of peace. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. He had chosen forgiveness, and in doing so, he had not only freed himself but also inspired others to do the same. The lasting legacy. The seeds of change. The neighborhood had transformed into something extraordinary. What began as a simple act of kindness by Keanu had grown into a thriving movement, inspiring people from all walks of life to contribute in their own way. From the bustling community center to the rejuvenated car dealership, every corner of the area seemed to radiate hope and compassion. Keanu's story, though still largely anonymous, had reached beyond the city. News outlets and social media platforms around the world began sharing accounts of the hidden hero, who had quietly ignited a chain reaction of generosity. The story wasn't about fame or fortune, it was about the profound impact of small, meaningful actions. A generation inspired. One of the most remarkable outcomes of Keanu's kindness was its effect on the younger generation. At local schools, teachers incorporated lessons about empathy, kindness, and community service into their curricula, using the neighborhood's transformation as a real-life example. At Westwood Elementary, a group of 5th graders started a project called Kindness Kits, assembling care packages filled with essentials like toiletries, snacks, and handwritten notes of encouragement. The kits were distributed to homeless shelters and families in need. The students beamed with pride as they saw their efforts make a tangible difference. In another part of the city, a high school senior named Maya wrote a scholarship essay titled The Power of One Act of Kindness. Inspired by Keanu's story, she organized a charity event at her school, raising enough funds to provide scholarships for underprivileged students. Her essay won first place in a national competition, and she used her platform to encourage others to take action in their communities. The global reach. The ripple effects of Keanu's actions extended far beyond his city. Inspired by the story, people around the world began initiating their own acts of kindness. A farmer in Iowa donated surplus crops to local food banks. A tech startup in Silicon Valley created a free app that connected volunteers with people in need. A single mother in Paris started a community garden to provide fresh produce for her neighbors. Keanu observed these developments with quiet humility. He hadn't set out to change the world, he had simply wanted to make a difference for a few families. But seeing how his actions had inspired so many others filled him with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. A documentary in the making. One day, Keanu received an email from a filmmaker named Ava, who had been following the story. She wanted to create a documentary highlighting the community's transformation and the countless acts of kindness that had followed. "I know you prefer to stay out of the spotlight," Ava wrote, "but your story deserves to be told, not for fame, but to inspire others to believe in the power of change." Keanu hesitated. He had always valued his privacy, and the thought of being the focus of a documentary made him uneasy. But after some reflection, he realized that the story wasn't just about him, it was about everyone who had come together to create something beautiful. He agreed to participate on one condition: the documentary would focus on the community and the people who had carried the torch of kindness forward. Ava agreed, and the project began. The documentary, titled Ripple, The Power of Kindness, featured interviews with the Garcia family, Luis the mechanic, Victor and his dealership staff, and many others who had been touched by the movement. It also highlighted the global impact, showcasing stories from people around the world who had been inspired to make a difference in their own communities. When the documentary premiered at a local theater, the audience was moved to tears. Keanu sat quietly in the back, his heart swelling as he listened to the stories of hope, resilience, and transformation. The legacy lives on. Years later, the neighborhood had become a model for community-driven change. The dealership had expanded its charitable programs, partnering with other businesses to provide resources for families in need. The community center had grown into a hub of education and support, offering classes, mentorship programs, and mental health services. Keanu remained a quiet presence, continuing to support initiatives behind the scenes. He often visited the community center, blending in with the crowd and listening to the stories of people whose lives had been changed. He didn't need recognition, knowing that he had made a difference was enough. One afternoon, as he walked through the park, Keanu noticed a young boy sitting on a bench, reading a book. The boy looked up and smiled. "Hi," the boy said. "Are you the man who helped my dad?" Keanu tilted his head, curious. "What do you mean?" "My dad said there was a man who helped him get a job and fix our car when we didn't have anything," the boy explained. "He said that man taught him to believe in people again." Keanu's heart ached with a bittersweet joy. "Your dad sounds like a strong person," he said. "I'm glad things are better for your family." The boy grinned. "He says we're supposed to help other people now. Like that man helped us." Keanu nodded, his chest tightening. "That's a good lesson." As the boy returned to his book, Keanu continued walking, a quiet smile on his face. He didn't need a legacy carved in stone or a name in lights. His legacy was in the lives he had touched, the hope he had restored, and the kindness he had inspired. A closing reflection. Years later, the story of the neighborhood's transformation became a timeless tale, shared in classrooms, books, and documentaries. It wasn't just a story about one man, it was a story about the collective power of humanity to rise above challenges and create a better world. Keanu, now older and grayer, often walked through the neighborhood, marveling at how far it had come. The once quiet streets were now filled with laughter, music, and the hum of activity. He knew his role in the story was just one chapter in a much larger narrative, a narrative of compassion, forgiveness, and the enduring belief that one act of kindness could change everything.